Do I trust you just because you've got a shiny website? Can I trust you? And I think the benefit of being public is you're naked and you've chosen to be naked. You don't go public unless you've got really big aspirations for a business.
Tell us about Pathos, what you do, what it's all about.
Pathos Communications exists to do something that really has never been done before in the history of the media. What we do is we democratize access to the media. So we believe that every entrepreneur is newsworthy. We've turned that process upside down. Is you start with the client. We start with what is newsworthy.
Right, you basically just reverse engineered the entire process. Why did you decide to go public? I'm not familiar with listings on the AIM.
Without raising the cash, there are easier ways to raise that money than going public.
Good afternoon and welcome to the podcast. There are so many exciting things that we're going to be discussing today. First off, I want to thank my guest in advance, Omar. Omar Hamdi and I have become fast friends over the last few weeks. And what's interesting about today's discussion, as opposed to some of the dozens of other people that we've had, is that instead of listing on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange or the OTC markets, Omar and his company, Pathos Communications, has listed on the AIM, on the London Stock Exchange, which is a little bit of a different game plan, and we're going to hear a little bit about that as well. And I guess we'll get into this. I'm going to be very curious how this came to be, but you have a very unique ticker symbol, and I'm always very fascinated by how people pick their ticker symbols, and some are given to you, some you have the chance to create, and yours is extremely clever. So that is NEWS for anybody that is following the stock. Is that right, Omar? News? Is that?
Yep. Okay. It is news. It is news.
Terrific. So with that introduction, again, thank you for joining us, and would love to dig in. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Seth, and it's a real pleasure to be speaking to you.
Awesome. So why don't we start off in current day form? Tell us about Pathos, what you do, what it's all about, and then I'd love to backtrack into your journey and how it all came to be. But tell us about Pathos.
Sure. So Pathos Communications exists to do something that really has never been done before in the history of the media, or certainly in the history of the public relations industry. The best way of explaining what we do is, I'm old enough to remember when only big companies had websites, and websites cost $50,000. And unless you were a huge corporate or a big enterprise, no one would ever imagine that you would have a website. And some crazy guy said, I think technology, things like the once upon a time revolutionary technology of WordPress templates, I think technology means that small and medium-sized businesses can have websites too. And some people said, you're crazy. And some people said, I think you might be right. And here's what happened. He was right, or she was right. And we now live in a world where the dry cleaners down the road has a 5-page website and takes online bookings. And if they didn't have a website, you'd sort of wonder if they were a legit business. Now, media coverage is just at the beginning of that journey that websites have gone on. So we live in a world where if you want media coverage, certainly premium top-tier media coverage, you have to pay a big retainer. You have to hire someone who's a hotshot publicist who was probably, the ex-editor of a big newspaper, and it's all sort of smoke-filled rooms and whiskey and cigars and favors and relationships. Technology has changed that. And what we do, to finally answer your question, what we do is we democratize access to the media. So we believe that every entrepreneur is newsworthy, every business is newsworthy, and our market is the 400 million SMBs, as we call them in the US, or SMEs, as we call them in the UK, the 400 million small and medium-sized businesses in the world. Just like every one of them can have a website, I think every one of them can have a news story. And we've got the technology to make that happen at scale at a very accessible price point. And they only pay us after they're published. So none of these retainers, none of these upfronts, payments that people sort of associate with traditional PR. So it's as you can see, I'm quite excited by the business.
You know what, your excitement and your passion and your enthusiasm is contagious. That is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, because you touched on a couple of different points that I think are important to unpack a little bit. First of all, I agree with you completely that the world that we're in, a lot of companies really need to focus on thought leadership. And what better way than through some of these articles and the media per se? Because you can get up there all day and say, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great. But what I've found, and I think what you're saying, is that sometimes when you have a third party that validates that you're great or that you have a great idea or a great company, that is more impactful than you standing on the rooftop saying, look at me, look at me. The second thing that I think is really unique that you said is that it's sort of pay to play, meaning you're only paying out of pocket once that there's been a proven article and success. None of this, hey, give me 20 grand a month and I'll come back to you. And that what ends up happening is that it's month after month and there's really very, very few results. How did you get into this segment? Like, are you a media guy? Were you used to be a broadcaster? Like, what's your background?
Yeah, so I'm a media guy and a tech guy. And so you put these two things together and you end up with a tech-driven, AI-driven PR firm. It kind of makes sense. So very much a tech and AI guy. Majored in cognitive science and AI 2 decades ago. So I was into AI before it was cool. It was actually very uncool 20 years ago. And I'm also a media guy, so I worked in the media for almost 10 years. I had a real, the real privilege to work for the BBC in the UK on a British Academy Award winning consumer affairs show. It's a big sort of primetime show. And that was really the culmination of a lifelong obsession with the media. I think the media is really important. The media is really powerful. I've been waking up in the morning watching the news for a couple of hours before starting my day since the age of 10 or 11. So it's a lifelong obsession. And I think now the media is becoming, it may be in some ways, more important than it was a year or 2 or 3 ago, because content is everywhere. LLMs can spew out content. We've all heard the phrase AI slop. And I think more than ever now, we need authoritative sources. And the thought experiment I always run with people is, okay, you might hear on X or Facebook or WhatsApp that there's going to be a hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake, but to really be sure that that's the case, what do? You turn your TV on, or you go to the New York Times website or wherever. And I think that source of authority is becoming more and more important now.
Let me ask you this, because I have over the years, from time to time, I've worked with different agencies and things like that. And what I had found is that there's a very traditional, old school way of doing this. And I think that what you're trying to bring out is much more of a automated AI / process, right? So in my mind, when I'm thinking of a media agency, I think of a bunch of, they sign on a client and then you've got 10 people in some sort of boiler room calling every contact they know, saying, hey, I got this guy, he's dynamic, he's great, get him on, get him on. And then basically they're scrambling one call at a time, one call at a time. And so, at best, after a month or 2 or 3, you'll get 2 or 3 nibbles. How have you taken that old school model and brought it to 2026?
I think that the main thing we've done is we've turned that process upside down. So the traditional approach is you start with the client, because you've got a very traditional agency business. It's not really scalable. So you have to just sort of choose the clients who can afford to pay the huge retainers. Because, if you've only got capacity for 30 clients, well, pick the 30 richest clients that you know. So you start with the client, and then you throw the client at editors, and you see what sticks. We do it in reverse. So we start with what is newsworthy. And we've got our AI agent stack, Pathos Mind. Currently, it's only for internal use, but one of the things we're working on this year is getting Pathos Mind, our AI agent stack, and Priscilla, our virtual publicist, who can join meetings like this and chat to you on WhatsApp or SMS, taking those two tools to production grade so we can share them with the world. But currently, we just use this internally. Pathos Mind monitors more than 50,000 news publications every day. And Pathos Mind will tell us that this person is newsworthy, this company is newsworthy, and here's why. And then we find the client who can fit what the editors are looking for. So if you start with the editors, you start with what's newsworthy, find the perfect client who's going to fit that. And it's quite easy to sign up clients because you're not asking them to commit until you actually get them published. What that means is you've actually got a very, very efficient process rather than the old-fashioned way, which is you are my client, whether I love you or hate you, you're my client, and I'm just going to throw you at editors and
Right.
see
So
what
you
sticks.
basically just reverse engineered the entire process. I like that.
Absolutely,
I like
absolutely.
that.
And I think a great example of this was a few years ago. I can't remember the name of the ship. There was a ship stuck in the Suez Canal, and it completely disrupted international trade. And for that week, in the eyes of every news editor, the sexiest thing in the world was a logistics consultant. Now, if you tell a news editor, do you want Kim Kardashian or do you want a logistics consultant? They'll choose Kim Kardashian. That week, the world of logistics was the most newsworthy thing. But there's no point signing the logistics consultant and waiting for a ship to get stuck in the Suez Canal. You'll be waiting
Great
a long time
analogy. Great
and still
analogy.
get tired of paying your retainer. Let's wait for the ship to get stuck and then call the logistics consultant. So everything we do is based on what's newsworthy. And that's why publishers love us, because we're only creating content that has real journalistic value for them.
I love that. I love that. Well, let me pivot for 1 second here. And now that we understand the business itself, so I obviously have spent 25 years in capital markets, focused on IPOs, only U.S. IPOs. We may be working with hundreds of foreign issuers, Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, Israel, Australia, but they're listing here on NASDAQ. Tell me, first of all, part A, why did you decide to go public? Everybody has a different reason, and I'm always fascinated by what prompted that masochistous route. No, I'm just joking. Why you wanted to go public. And B is, so I'm not familiar with the listings on the AIM. If you could just give us a little bit of insight about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So why go public? First of all, it's not just about the money. And I think a lot of people look at sort of smaller companies or growth companies or micro caps or nano caps, whatever word you want to use. And if it's just about the fundraise, and I wonder if you agree, if it's just about raising the cash, there are easier ways to raise that money than going public, easier and cheaper and faster ways to raise that money than going public. But going public does achieve certain things that being private does not achieve. For me, it's really about, for lack of a better phrase, the intangible benefits. We went public a few days before the holidays in December.
By the way, I mean, you get a big, like, mazel tov. Like, you've only been public for less than 30 days, I think, right?
Yep, for 28 days.
You may be the newest public company that I've interviewed over the last 10 years, but congratulations. Okay. Okay, so go on. So there's intangibles.
It's the intangibles. And I've only been back in the office for a week and a half at time of, recording this interview. I can already sense the difference. So the intangibles mean that when we speak to really the three constituencies that drive our business, in no particular order, clients, publishing partners, so news publishers, and employees, I can see the difference because suddenly they know who they're talking to. And it's easy to forget that as a private company, unless you're very, very high profile, I mean, there's a lot of fakery and confusion and opaque stuff going on. And, just because you've got a nice headshot on LinkedIn, can I trust you? Just because you've got a shiny website, can I trust you? And I think the benefit of being public is you're naked and you've chosen to be naked. So at least people know what they're dealing with. And it also shows really the commitment to the company we're building. A month ago, someone talking to me would have no way of knowing that Pathos is not just a nice lifestyle business and Omar is running it for cash flow and he's planning on cashing in his chips and retiring at the age of 40. Now they know that's not the plan. You don't go public unless you've got really big aspirations for a business. So already I can see some of the conversations I've had with publishers, the conversations I have with employees, the conversations I have with clients. They know the mission we're on. And they know it's real.
If I could just add on to that, both for you and for the listeners, because people have asked me over the years, why go public? This being one of the major considerations that you just outlined. But I came up with this very corny word of cave. And cave basically are the reasons why a company would want to go public. Number one is now you can use your stock as currency, right? So you can go ahead and do A, which is acquisitions, because now you've got the currency to do the acquisitions. V is your valuation is entirely different as a public company, we hope, versus being this unknown private company. And then E has a dual meaning. Number one is there's an ultimate exit, and E is also allowing you to hire higher caliber employees because you're public, you're trustworthy, you're naked, as you said. And so, that cave model is important for shareholders to know and CEOs, and then also as a public company. And now, if you can just elaborate, so I would imagine you could have gone two other exchanges. Why the AIM?
So I think, first of all, London's neutral home for us. We're a British company. I'm British. So that's the sort of natural place you would look. However, we're not listed in London and we're not listed on AIM out of blind patriotism. And we're a very global business. We've got clients in 89 countries. And starting in the summer of 2024, I really looked at pretty much every major stock exchange in the world. Canada down to Australia, across to even Hong Kong and Singapore. So I looked at everything. Now, there are very successful micro caps listed on the NASDAQ, but it's a tough environment. And the impression I had looking at NASDAQ, for example, is that there isn't a distinct ecosystem necessarily for growth companies. I think the special thing in London with the AIM market, which is it's part of the London Stock Exchange. We stood in the London Stock Exchange balcony. It's the same balcony that the multi-billion-pound companies use. AIM has its own ecosystem, and these are top quality, long-term institutional investors, and all they do is invest in growth companies that are listed on AIM. So there's this whole universe of people that are dedicated to that. You're not competing with NVIDIA for their attention. You're competing with companies of a similar size to Pathos for their attention, and maybe companies that are a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger. And having that dedicated ecosystem within the London Stock Exchange, I think that's a really, really special thing. You don't have to be a British company. I mean, there are some great people employed by the London Stock Exchange, based in New York. Chris and Wendy, who really sort of fly the flag for AIM and for the London market. I think the IPO in London that was just a couple of days before us was a US company called PowerPro, and they listed on AIM. And I think the CEO actually wrote some op-eds about why he chose AIM. So if anyone's really interested, you can sort of go down that road. But I think that's really the clincher. And when I looked in the eyes of the advisors, the brokers, I really sensed that they were as focused on what our share price will be in 5 years as they were on what our share price will be on IPO. And I didn't always get that same feeling in other markets, because it's maybe it was a little bit more transactional, I'd say. So for us, it made sense.
Fantastic. That's a good enough reason. Now, let me ask you, one of the things that I was extremely impressed with, and that I think that people would find interesting and want to learn from, is you had just mentioned that you're in 89 countries. Now, generally speaking, I don't know if you know this about me, I'm just a kid from Brooklyn. So for me, and I have no accent, so don't tell me I have a Brooklyn accent, but for me, anything outside of like Staten Island and New Jersey, for me, is already a foreign transaction. I've found many times that people that are born, raised in companies that are launched outside of the UK have a much stronger worldwide view of opportunity than New Yorkers or people that are in the US. Now, you're saying 89 countries. Walk me through how does that happen? How does that happen, and how does that work? Meaning, because for your industry, you're talking about so many different languages and so many different opportunities and so many different cultures, and like how do you bring that all together?
I think about this a lot. First of all, I should say I've noticed the same thing. And I remember once a long-time client of ours who's based in Chicago. At one point, we had the opportunity to publish him in the Globe and Mail, which is the newspaper of record in Canada. And he said, "Oh, well, that's foreign." And just to check, I looked at the map, and Chicago's pretty close. You can walk to Canada from Chicago if you've got some good walking boots. Now, to a Brit who's from a small island who has a global operational hub in Dubai, which is sort of the center of different continents, you might say, well, why would anyone be so domestically focused? But you know what? If you're in the biggest economy in the world, you can be domestic and still make a heck of a lot of money. So
But there is that, like, again, so many companies that I speak to that are based out of, again, Singapore, Malaysia, or Israel, or Australia. It's just like ABC's part of their game plan to expand international. So do you find that you have to balance different cultures, different sales? Like, how do you get customers? I'll ask you basically, how do you get customers in all these different places?
You get customers. So we run a digital business. So every way that we get customers is kind of borderless. Email is borderless. Phone calls are almost borderless. SMS follow-ups are almost borderless. WhatsApp is borderless. Zoom is borderless. So we are a sort of digitally native business. So it to an extent, it's sort of irrelevant where someone is based. And we have the perhaps unfair advantage of speaking English as a business, which is, the lingua franca, the global business language. So that makes it easier. And, in all of those 89 countries, the business class in those countries will often do business in English. I remember a family-owned business in Panama that we got published in Forbes Mexico. And we did the whole thing in English. We even wrote the article in English. They approved the article in English, and then we sent it to the publishers, and they translated it into Spanish and published it. So, I think speaking English is maybe an unfair advantage, but I think there are going to be more and more tech-enabled, AI-driven digital businesses where actually it's sort of irrelevant where someone is based, with the possible exception of, North Korea and Iran or something, but other than that, it's a big world. And a lot of the time, we find out that actually, the individual we're dealing with is based in one country. It turns out, the company is, registered somewhere else.
Sure.
So I just think being international by nature, it's also a lot easier for us with our workforce. So we've got just over 60 employees, and at the last count, 25 nationalities. So it would feel kind of weird if you've got 25 nationalities only serving one nationality of clients.
That would be a waste of talent. Absolutely.
Yeah, but just to your point about going multilingual, I mean, that is not a straightforward thing, because let's say you've got a salesperson who speaks Spanish. Okay, if he's selling in Spanish, well, then the delivery needs to be in Spanish. The customer service needs to be in Spanish. The accounts receivable needs to be in Spanish. You can't then interrupt. If me or you purchased a product in English, but then suddenly it was Swahili, we'd say, well, hold on a second. What I bought into was an English language transaction. Now, AI helps, because AI speaks every language. So when we look at things like Priscilla, our virtual publicist, she speaks, I think the API that we use for her is, I think it's something like 70 languages, right out of the box. So I think there are going to be more businesses that are naturally, instinctively global. And that's very much, when we talk about our market, we think in global terms. Absolutely.
Let me ask you, just in speaking to these, because you're speaking to CEOs of all levels and executives and different types of personalities and characters. There's a question that I get asked very often when it comes to LinkedIn services per se. And the question that is asked is, what is the ROI? Just like, hey, if I'm spending a couple grand a month, I want to know what am I getting for it? And so my answer, generally speaking, is that ROI means different things to different people. For you, do you come across CEO? Let's focus strictly on the CEOs. Do you present your services and your solutions to these guys, and they're like, yeah, well, what's my ROI on that? Like, what's my ROI in getting published? In my mind, you are selling the most important product. And in my mind, you're selling legitimacy, like you said before. If I'm Googling somebody for the first time, I'm checking out, number one, do they have a dynamic LinkedIn profile so that they're a real thought leader, or is it like that generic gray stuff and they haven't spent a minute on it? And number two is, are there articles by them, about them, from them? So that's an intangible, but that legitimacy is priceless. What do you say to them when they ask you, hey, it sounds like you have a great company, but what's my ROI? What's your answer?
This is a super important conversation. And I think when you're taking a product to a new market, and global SMB, SME customers adopting media coverage en masse, that's the new market. Yeah. So when you're taking a product to a new market, I think you have a moral and practical obligation to really coach those customers on how to use that product. If you sell a washing machine to someone who's never used a washing machine before, it's probably a good idea to send someone around to explain what all the buttons do and give them a demonstration of a spin wash. They'll probably feel better about your washing machine and they'll use it more. So ROI is absolutely at the heart of what we do. We've got a whole team called the ROI team that is there really.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
never, out of the thousands of companies that I've spoken to in the last 25 years, I've never had anybody actually have a team with that name.
Well, if everyone's asking you about something, maybe launch a team to address
Right.
that thing. And this is a really integral part of our product, is as soon as we get someone published for the first time, they then immediately have a session with our ROI team. And that's sort of an in-house growth and marketing consultancy who don't charge for their time. That's something we give to our clients because we want them to use the washing machine and see how clean the shirts get when they use the washing machine.
Omar, by the way, you
So
get the best analogies. I go on all day with your analogies, you know. We got ships getting stuck, we've got washing machines. Keep going.
yeah, well, I'm a wordsmith. Uh, so the ROI team is really, really important, and that credibility, I would describe that as sort of a first layer business case, a first layer reason to invest in media coverage. It's our job to say, well, what does that credibility mean? Credibility with whom, for what purpose, and how will you know if it's working? And it's really different for different people. For some businesses, for example, it's all about helping their sales team close deals. And we need to create product-focused media coverage that they can put, in their proposals, in the sales team's email signatures, just before they say click to sign, they say, this is what XYZ publication said about us. For other customers, it's all about investors, and we need to gear up for our next funding round. And sometimes it's quite personal, and that's okay too. On occasion, we've had someone say, do you know what the best thing is? Every time you get me published, I send it to my parents, and they tell me how proud they are of me. Now, that's not a business case, but it's a valid reason.
I agree.
It's a valid reason, because if your parents are proud, your employees, clients, and investors are proud too. They just might not say it to you. ROI is important, and it's different for each client. Absolutely.
Let me go back to one of the first items that I had mentioned. I'm pretty sure I haven't practiced securities law in 24 years, but when I did, I remember that both for NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, I think you were able to pick 3 choices of your ticker symbol, and then they decided which one it would be in final, or they did. How does it work with the AIM, and was news your decision? Did they give that to you? Did you have a brainstorming session for days on end of whatever symbol should be?
News was my decision. So the way it worked is the nomad, the nominated advisor, who is a really important role. It's sort of the interface between us and the exchange. They said, do you have any ideas of what you'd like your ticker to be? And because I'm obsessive, I'd already checked, and I knew that news, NEWS,
that was it. Did you
was
struggle
available
between 5 different choices, or that you
No,
knew?
it's news. I was just like, give me news. And they said, well, we'll check if it's available. I've already checked. It's available. Please reserve it immediately. And I think it's powerful, because we really are at the, that's what we do. We are in the news, and we're there to keep that news ecosystem working for everyone involved, the subjects of articles who are our clients, the news publishers who need good quality content and need to protect their business models in what's a really challenging time for news publishers. I don't think anyone really wants to live in a world without journalists. Right. I think that would be, quite a scary world, frankly. So we need to protect these institutions. In free societies, we don't have a ministry of information that tells everyone what's true and what's false. So really, we need the news to survive, and we need good content in the news so that Seth and Omar and everyone else keeps reading the news. So we are right there in the center of the news and bringing it into the 21st century.
It's the perfect symbol. Full disclosure, if I ever end up deciding to take a company public on the New York Stock Exchange, where it's 3 letters, based on this call, my symbol request is going to be ROI. I'm just telling you now. You heard it here first. But that being said, I want to be mindful of your time. Is there anything else that that you think that listeners should know about Pathos, or something you want to leave them with? And anything to wrap it up?
Well, we expect it to be a very exciting year ahead. We're already seeing those intangible benefits that become tangible eventually. We've seen our team be energized, professionalized even more than they were last year. Clients are really, really enthusiastic about us going public. They now really know what our vision is, and our product range is expanding. So there's more things that we can offer them. new publisher relationships. So really, really exciting time. And behind it all is the technology that we're building and scaling and working towards that moment when we say to every one of those 400 million small and medium-sized businesses in the world, you deserve a full-time publicist. You don't have to pay $150,000 a year for that publicist. She's called Priscilla. She's virtual, and she's going to do whatever you need her to do. She can chat to you on SMS. She can look at your LinkedIn posts. If you want to give her access, she can look at your email inbox. She can attend meetings. And that's going to be a really special moment in sort of democratizing access to the media. And we're powering towards that moment.
That is awesome. I hope you'll come back in maybe 6 or 12 months, give us an update. And, with this, I'll end. I was only in the UK maybe once or twice. And the last time was as a teenager with my parents. So that was quite a little bit ago. I mentioned this the other day, I was only in Dubai once, and that was as a stopover. So I need to spend more time there. But this is a formal invitation. Let me know the next time you're in New York. We'll grab lunch, we'll grab coffee. And thank you for your time today. And again, it's NEWS. And we appreciate hearing the story, and we wish you continued success. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Seth. And I will be in New York soon, but I also hope to see you in London and or Dubai very soon. So we can do a world tour. Omar and Seth's world tour.
I love it. Thanks, Omar. Take care.